Hey, thanks for coming and checking me out again. It's been uh it's been an interesting couple of days. I got a lot of wackiness going on, but I've really enjoyed a lot of what's been going on, which is a nice change. It's not always easy to find goodness in every day that goes by, but even with all the stresses that have been going on, I found myself really enjoying the past few days. Um, I've been hanging out doing a lot of game streaming, which I'm really into. So go check that out. The Stan Nibs on Twitch if you feel like it. I'll be on there a couple days a week anyway. And I've really found myself getting to think a lot about the things going on in my brain and thinking about my physical state and all that fun stuff that comes along with it, which isn't necessarily my favorite thing to talk about, but you know, it's interesting how much easier it is to deal with stuff when you're understanding your own body. And I know you hear this all the time, but things like your diet and getting exercise and sleep, they really do help with a lot of that stuff. So if you have the opportunity and you're capable of doing so, I suggest trying it. Even in small amounts, it can be really satisfying. Um, but on the other end of things, I've gotten some really nice input from friends of mine and been able to really express myself and hear people expressing themselves, and that's made a huge difference as well. So I just want to thank everybody out there for being a part of my life because I really appreciate it. A good friend of mine hit me up today. He was drunk texting, as he said. And I was the subject of the drunk text for a little while there. And it isn't your standard drunk text in the late night. It was, earlier in the evening. And it was really nice to hear that I'm missed. I've been spending a lot of time hanging out in this room and with friends. And the friends that I do get to see is a very small group compared to my normal seeing hundreds of people a week sometimes. At least 30 or 40 usually. And it was good to hear from a friend who's a teacher and had a lot of great insight and reminded me of the stories that involve the hero's journey or the hero's arc and the story of Gilgamesh and the Iliad and those kinds of things. And it's oddly refreshing to be able to have somebody to talk about that with when a lot of my days has been filled with schoolwork and textbooks and video games that are just kind of not usually so in depth. And at one point, I felt I was trying to compare myself to Gilgamesh. And he said, no, you're not Gilgamesh, you're Diomedes from the Iliad, who was one of the only mortals to face gods and come out victorious on the other side. And it made me feel really good. It gave me a different kind of self-esteem boost, which is something that I'd forgotten I needed. But outside of the schoolwork and the video games, I've been reading a lot. Some of the articles that I read online can be really interesting, and one of the more interesting ones that I read was about a female skull that was found with lapis lazuli in the teeth and the tartar. It was really interesting to think about that kind of thing because the kind of roles that females played in the past were very different than what they are today. But what it brought to light was that they aren't that different. And that underneath the guise of the history that's being exposed to us and things that are presented to us as the truth and history aren't always what actually happened. As we dig deeper into the archaeology finds and the books that we still have, we find that there's big differences in the roles that humans played based on their place in life and how they were born. Understanding that a female having lapis lazuli in their teeth is a really big deal is a key component to all of this. That was a precious stone for a long time. It was used mostly for holy texts and holy paintings because it was a dye that was very hard to obtain. And a female having possession of something like that meant that what they were working on was very important, and who they were was very important. Whether we know what their name was or not, the fact that they had access to such a rare mineral that's made into dyes and inks and paints at the time that this skull was dated to, it's kind of amazing. See, most of the time, it was monks that had access to lapis. It's one of those things that was used for painting the Virgin Mary and side scripting inside of holy texts. And so it was usually a monk who would have access to these. And given the ability to access these by some sort of royalty or some larger power who was utilizing these texts and pictures for their own good, really. And the fact that a female had access to all of this is exciting. They had so much access to it that over time, it had become embedded in the plaque in their teeth, and the plaque had become tartar, and the tartar had solidified, and this person died, and it stuck. The mineral was stuck in between the teeth to be found hundreds, if not thousands of years later. Well, hundreds, because we're talking about holy texts here, right? Don't want to get ahead of myself. But it reminds me that even mortals can fight the gods. And in this case, even the nuns can have access to some of the more rare minerals. It's kind of interesting to think that it's very likely that this person worked with the minerals a lot, so much so that there was an accumulation in the plaque that got solidified that could be found hundreds of years later. It's something to think about. The importance of the people that we think were important back then may or may not have been the most important. It just means that the history that we're reading about now, that we know about now, wasn't necessarily written or inscribed by them. Because some of the most important people are those that got to write books and write scriptures. They're the ones that were really leaving the history for us to find, which is incredibly interesting. Makes me question the history in the books that we have now and what kind of bias there might be inside of those things that we find, and how much of the undiscovered discoveries are out there waiting to tell us the real history or the missing history. How important are those little pieces of rare ore that get stuck in the teeth of a nun? I get to talk to people a lot. That's kind of the reason I started releasing all of these, is because I miss doing that. And this seems like a direct portal into the people who are interested in listening. But the one thing about being in the place that I was on Monday nights, being able to jump on stage and take control of the microphone that I usually sat in a booth and turned up and down for other people. There were people out there who weren't looking for me that got to find me. I feel that's a hard thing to do nowadays. Harder than I expected it to be. But I'm going to keep reaching out there and trying to impact the lives that didn't necessarily know they needed me. I feel that's a good way for most humans to try and live. It's not necessarily about the people that are immediately around you and the ones that know you best, because there can be so much discrepancy in the way that you're perceived with the people that you already know. They're used to the person that you were and that you are and that you're becoming. That being able to grab a single snapshot and see it in a different light is really hard. Maybe it's easier to get my points across to people who don't think they already know what I'm trying to portray. And if you do know me, I'm not asking you to stop watching. I'm just asking you to maybe see me in a different light right now. Because a lot of times I want to portray myself as Gilgamesh, running through the hero's journey and falling asleep before I finally get to make the last move, missing out on my immortality. But really, maybe I'm a little more like King Diomedes, where I never wanted the book to be written about me. And long after I die is the first time that it will be. But somewhere inside of all of this, there's a change going on inside of me. I can feel it physically. I know something's happening. I just haven't quite figured it out. So I'm paying more attention to who I am here and everywhere else. It's become a journey unto itself, feeling myself age and understanding how I'm aging. An interesting trip indeed. And the more I search for that immortality while I'm still alive, I almost feel like I'm getting farther and farther away from it, when I just kind of need to fight the battles of the immortals who already exist so that somebody else can tell my story later. I guess I'm subsiding that a little bit by recording all of these and not just doing the things I'm supposed to be doing, but right now, in the age and time that we're in, there's nobody keeping those kinds of records anymore. The story of the things that I've told and will tell and are telling right now can only be told by me. And that's important too. Every once in a while, I kind of want to crush up a little lapis, throw it in my teeth, see how long it'll last. Maybe eating the minerals that dye our holy texts would bring me closer to the spirituality that I constantly seek. Maybe writing more things and playing more music will spread that voice farther than those texts ever could. Because somebody out there might decide that my history isn't worth writing down anymore. The passing on of my story can only be passed on by me or the archaeologist who finds the lapis in my teeth. So, the less I feel like Gilgamesh, the more I feel like Diomedes, the more I think I'm actually becoming a nun, writing some holy text. My name is Supe. Thanks for hanging out.
Sky over the Atlantic.